Hello everyone, it is Matt here from Scoop in Response, and today we are going to be going over a commander that was released with Ikoria. You may know him much more commonly for his slot in the companion zone in all of the, I guess, standard, historic, and also some modern decks that all run him as the companion. He's a really sweet commander. I guess it's a he. It's a bird serpent, so it's hard to know. Reads as follows: 3 and a Azorius, so white blue or white blue, so 5-drop all over. He reads flying 4/5. When Yorion enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-land permanents you own and control. Return those cards to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So it's a blink deck in essence, but this is not like your typical blink deck. This is a very, very powerful engine for setting up some disgusting things. And we are going to be doing disgusting things with this deck. This is not a nice deck. This is not a fun deck to play against. This is going to lose you friends, and it's going to cause lots of fights at the table. But nevertheless, we need villains, for there can be no heroes without villains. So what this deck is going to be doing is essentially using a whole bunch of our recurrable flicker effects as well as some castable flicker effects. We're going to cast it on our Yorion, and we're going to be using the Yorion ETB trigger to essentially flicker things that we can then flicker our opponent's creatures, and in particular their commanders, and then stifle the return to the battlefield delayed triggers that these flicker effects occur. So it might sound a bit complicated, but essentially we're going to be bouncing or flickering our opponent's creatures. They're going to look at the effect and go, oh, it's going to come back, and we're going to stop that from happening using a whole bunch of different techs. It is a complicated interaction, but the short of it is with Core 20, I think it was Core 21 that came out. There was a change to the rules for Commander, which basically said that when you had a commander change zones, so if it changed from the battlefield to exile, if state-based actions hadn't been checked, you could have a replacement effect occur where you would move your commander to the command zone. So that is different to how it used to work. Essentially, you could just move it back to the command zone if it was exiled, and it wouldn't be an issue. But now, if you allow the flicker to occur, so you flicker the commander, it leaves the battlefield, and then you stifle the return to battlefield trigger, that commander is actually removed from the game for the rest of the game. They can't move it to the command zone, they can't cast it, they can't do anything with it. So it's a very, very nasty little interaction. You may have seen some lists that use Rune for it. It's a very similar, I guess, kind of gameplay. I like this type of shell in just blue-white because we're going to be, I guess, stacking a whole bunch of ETB effects and some cycling things as well to make this happen. So we're going to get to draw a lot of cards. We're going to be able to flicker a lot of our things for a whole bunch of extra value as well. So let us check out the deck. First and foremost, we have Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, Charming Prince, Knight of the White Orchid, Wall of Omens, Watcher for Tomorrow, Eldrazi Displacer, Flicker Wisp, Nimble Obstructionist, Recruiter of the Guard, Reflector Mage, Skyclave Apparition. We've got Soul Herder, Spell Queller, Spell Seeker. Those are our 1 to 3 drops. They are all about creating us value when we have creatures enter the battlefield, preserving our life total. We've got a little bit of card draw and a little bit of ramp, so Knight of the White Orchid, can catch us up a little bit. Wall of Omens for drawing cards and blocking. Flicker Wisp is our first, I guess, combo piece in that regard, so we can use Flicker Wisp to exile a target permanent and then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So we can do things like flicker their commander. They will basically let that happen, and then when the end step occurs, we can either end the turn or we're going to just stifle that return to the battlefield ability. So this is going to work best when it is the first commander, so I would say pick your first target to do this wisely, because after that it's going to be more than likely that as soon as you attempt to flicker any commander, that people are going to most likely just put them in the command zone regardless of if they know you have a stifle effect or an end of turn effect. But it is always a threat. So what you've got is, after that first flicker effect occurs and that first person's commander is then exiled, you've got a whole bunch of 30 Path to Exile Swords to Plowshares in your deck. Essentially, each time you try and do something, it is going to result in them moving the commander back into the command zone, and in which case you can then use it to just flicker and bounce the, I guess, relevant permanents of your opponents to basically control the board as best you can, and then sort of set up a win from there. Eldrazi Displacer is a flicker effect that you get to you get to control. It's not going to let you do the flicker effect in the sense that you can't stifle a return, because there's no delayed trigger with this. So it's just the exile to get them to tap it, to bounce it, but still super useful if you need to use it to flicker one of your own creatures that, say, Flicker Wisp, for example, which will actually let you do the effect the proper way that we can actually stifle. So good ETB effects with Watcher of Tomorrow, everything like that. Nimble Obstructionist is a uncounterable activated or triggered ability counter, so it's a stifle that you cycle with, which actually works really well with another card that we have, which is Astral Slide, so super cool tech with that, but we will get into that a little later. Recruiter of the Guard is just to find anything with 2 toughness or less. Most things in our deck are going to have 2 toughness or less, so we can do it to get things like Archaeomancer or, any of our big things. We can get a Muldrifter. So there's literally hundreds of targets within this list. After the 3 drops, we've got Archaeomancer, Brago, King Eternal, Felidar Guardian, Core Cartographer, Narumeha, Restoration Angel, Solemn Simulacrum, Thassa, Deep Dwelling, Muldrifter, Peregrine Drake, Revelark, Agent of Treachery, Scholar of the Ages. So I think there's really only one infinite combo in this list, and it's sort of a bit janky. This isn't a deck that's supposed to really go infinite or try to go infinite all the time. You're really just looking for value, but it does have it in there because it makes sense. We've got Eldrazi Displacer and Peregrine Drake. Essentially, you pay 3 mana to untap 5 lands, so you keep doing that. You keep doing that as many times as you would like. Excuse me, it's very early in the morning here for me, so I'm a little bit slow today, and you'll net 2 mana each time. Revelark is a sweet little combo piece. You use it to, it leaves the battlefield, you return 2 target creatures, 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, and then it re-enters the battlefield, and then you can flicker it again later and do all kinds of cool, wonderful things with that. Agent of Treachery is all about just stealing permanents, then you flicker the agent, and then you steal another permanent, and then when you have more than 3, I think it is, at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, draw 3 cards. So it's card draw as well. Scholar of the Ages is just another target that you'll be using to flicker, much like Archaeomancer, where you can take sorceries and instants from your graveyard and put them back into your hand. So really sweet, value loops in that respect. For the next part of the deck, we've got spells. So sorceries, instants, we'll also look at the planeswalkers. So we have Flicker, Idyllic Tutor, Decree of Justice. These are our only sorceries in the deck. Flicker speaks for itself. Idyllic Tutor, we have a lot of, things that we can tutor for that are enchantment and enchantment cards, so you can use it to go and get a Thassa or an Astral Slide or something like that. Lots of choices there. Decree of Justice is really just for the cycling ability, so you cycle it for 3, but then you can pay X and you can create soldiers as well. So it's just another way to, get a trigger off Astral Slide that also generates you a little bit of value as well. Instants, we have Cloud Shift, Ephemerate, Essence Flux, Stifle, Flicker of Fate, Mystic Reflection, Snap, Tail's End, Ghostly Flicker, Displace, Trick Bind, Teferi's Time Twist, Discontinuity, and Sublime Epiphany. And then rounding it out with the Planeswalkers, we've got Teferi, Time Raveler, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Venser, the Sojourner. So effectively, Venser being a flicker on a stick. We've got Teferi that is a tuck and card draw. I think it's just great. you know, we're going to be drawing a lot of cards, and we have a lot of ways to protect our planeswalkers, so I think it's a pretty sweet include for this type of deck. And Teferi, there's a niche interaction where you can spell Queller one of your opponent's spells, and then Teferi doesn't let it get cast again, but it's also about just protecting those loops. So if you actually go for the Stifle and you have Teferi out, there is absolutely nothing that they can do to stop that from happening, so pretty sweet. So Cloud Shift, Ephemerate, Essence Flux, Teferi's Time Twist, all just flicker effects. Trick Bind, Tail's End, Trick Bind and Tail's End are really just for the the Stifles. Ghostly Flicker, it's just another way to start that loop again, so you might want to target, you know, your land and Yorion or something like that, so pretty sweet there. Sublime Epiphany is just like a bigger Cryptic command. You can definitely run Cryptic command as well in the list. I think it's probably a great include, but it's not 100% needed. Discontinuity is a 2 mana in the turn spell if you cast it on your turn. So it's basically a Stifle. You wait for that delayed trigger to go on the stack in your end step, and then you cast Discontinuity for 2, and it ends the turn. Or you can cast it for 6 on someone else's turn and just, you know, ruin their day. Next up, we have artifacts and enchantments. So we've got Arkham's Astrolabe, Sol Ring, Arcane Signet, Azorius Signet, Echo Wellspring, Mazemind Tome, Sundial of the Infinite, Talisman of Progress, Archaeomancer's Map, Gilded Lotus, and then with enchantments, we've got Omen of the Sea, Birth of Melodus, Active Authority, Astral Slide, Omen of the Sun, Leyline of Anticipation, Elspeth Conquers Death, Skybind, and Shark Typhoon. So the name of the game is having a few pieces of key ramp, so no deck without ramp is going to really survive in any power list, so we want to make sure we have some of that. Archaeomancer's Map is really sweet in this list. It's a new card that came out with Commander 21. Essentially, this is a white Cultivate, but because it's an artifact, a permanent that we can then flicker, it means that we can actually then continuously use it to get lands out of our deck and then ramp accordingly where you know, we're not ahead of lands. So really sweet interaction with flicker effects. Mazemind Tome is a similar kind of like slow value engine. We can essentially scry or draw, get it up to right before it's about to pop, and then we flicker it and we get to do it again, so we don't have to exile it. Sundial of the Infinite is just a sweet end the turn ability for 1. So, you know, you put it down as early as you can. It's going to bait out removal if people know what's going on, but most of the time you're just going to use it as a end the turn, which can actually stop a lot of things from happening. You know, if people want to remove your creatures or something like that on your turn, then you can actually just activate that and stop that from happening. Omen of the Sea, Omen of the Sun. These were printed at the same time as Yorion in the same set, and same with Birth of Melodus and Elspeth Conquers Death. Now that I look at it all of them work really well together. You can reset sagas with Yorion so that they get another exile or another land out of the deck, or you just get to do your preordain, or your you know, you create your 2 dudes and gain some life. So all of them just really sweet flicker effects. Leyline of Anticipation is good because we don't have a lot of I guess instant speed interaction. Sometimes we want to you know, hold up a lot of our resources for someone else's turn, so it might be that we want to get ETB effects on your opponent's end step right before your turn, rather than having it sit out there for a whole round and you know, risk it being removed. So essentially that's the reason for the include on that one. Active Authority is an exile effect when it ETBs for artifacts or enchantments, and at the beginning of upkeep you can exile an artifact or enchantment. If you do, you give it to your the controller of that permanent. We're not going to be using it for that. We're just going to be using it as an exile effect on a single permanent, and then occasionally we will flicker it because it'll then ETB again. It doesn't care about leaving the battlefield, it just cares about if you're using the upkeep trigger. So you can just flicker it and then exile another permanent, and you know, Bob's your uncle in that regard. Astral Slide and Skybind. Now these are 2 combo pieces. We'll go with Skybind first. Constellation, whether Skybind or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, exile target non-enchantment permanent, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So you play an enchantment, you get a flicker effect. You play an enchantment, you get a flicker effect. So what that means is you put this on the board, then you play an enchantment and you have a Stifle ready to go, and you get to do the combo. Simple as that. Astral Slide. Whenever a player cycles a card, you may remove target creature from the game. If you do, return that creature to play under its owner's control at end of turn. So I'm not sure what the errata on this actually is. We might just see if there's a different printing for this to make sure that we are using the wording correctly. Okay. Yeah, so at the beginning of the next end step, it's been errated too. So essentially exactly the same as all of the rest of our, you know, our recurable flickers. What's really cool about this is that because cycling is, I guess, a pretty cheap and uncounterable thing, once we have our slide out on the battlefield, it's going to be really hard for people to counter that flicker because they've got to counter the triggered ability themselves, so they've got to have their own stifle effects. So we can do something like cycle a land, and because it's a land, you know, we're running mostly untapped lands. You know, we have 3 or I think 5 cycling lands in the deck. We mostly have untapped lands, so we're not too worried about having to play an occasional tap land if we need to. But that one cycle with the Astral Slide, these are, you know, almost zero in the respect of the opportunity cost to have a different card in there. So yes, there is an opportunity cost, but it's quite low compared to other combo pieces, you know, where you might have to run just strictly terrible cards. So, you know, cycling lands are always okay. They're definitely not tier 1, but they're like tier 1.5, tier 2. Excuse me. So, you know, you've got 5 cycle targets right there, but then you've also got, you know, your Nimble Obstructionist, your Decree of Justice, your Shark Typhoon. All 3 of those are good cards in their own right. So you don't have to worry about having all these crappy cycling cards in your list that you just wouldn't play otherwise. All of these cards are, you know, good on their own. So definitely worth the include of Astral Slide. That's pretty much the entire list aside from our lands. We'll have a look at this. It's a very, I guess, straightforward land list. You know, we've got the 2 castles because I think they're great in this kind of list. You know, we're going to often have, you know, land go kind of happen. Even though this isn't a control deck, it's kind of a control deck in the way that it's, you know, reactively removing a lot of things. You know, we're going to want to keep our mana up for both of those castles if we need to create value for them. We've got Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Excuse me. Mostly just for that enchantment recursion. You know, you could make an argument for running, you know, your artifact recursion as well, you know, Buried Ruin, something like that. It's got all of the, you know, expected jewels that you would have in this kind of list, a few fetches, and then a whole bunch of snow-covered basics, you know, which are mostly just for the Astrolabe. It's really the only reason that they're there for. So if you don't want to run the Astrolabe, by all means, just switch these to basics. But a very, I guess, straightforward land base. Oh, an Ancient Tomb as well. So yeah, nothing really crazy. Mystic Sanctuary is another way that we're just going to be able to recur, you know, those instants and sorceries, put them back on our library and get a bit more value out of them from that. So that's pretty much the list. It's all about, you know, bouncing creatures and then controlling all of the permanents on the board. You know, it's not a counter spell deck. It's a control deck in a different capacity. I think blue-white is sort of known to be this, you know, force of will, force of negation type deck, but you can control it in a whole bunch of other ways. You know, there's heaps of value that can be had if you can, you know, activate, you know, 4 or 5 modes from Sublime Epiphany. There's heaps of ways that you're just going to create a whole bunch of value after you've demonstrated this extreme threat to someone's commander. So I think it's super useful to have this kind of, you know, phase 1, phase 2 play for a commander, particularly when it's only in 2 colors. You know, it's not the same as a 4 or 5 color CEDH deck where you're just, we're going to try for Thoracle Consultation. If that doesn't work, we'll try for Heliod Ballista or something like that. You know, we don't have, you know, you're definitely in the colors to run Heliod Ballista. I just don't think it's, you know, on theme. Chuck it in if you want, but for the most part, you don't really need that kind of interaction in this list. Both of those cards, I think, would be like pretty bad without the other one in this deck, hence why I haven't included it. So if you like this kind of deck and you're enjoying what you're seeing on the channel, I really enjoy the rate that we're growing. It's, you know, I love putting out this content. This list was actually, I guess, suggested to me, the commander was suggested to me by one of the commenters in a previous video. So if you do have a video that you would like to see me make using a commander that you are potentially brewing and you want to see how we would do it, definitely keen to explore that with you. If you are enjoying the content and you want to see more of it, would love a subscribe, hit a like button as well where you can. You know, we're fast growing and wanting to get to that partner level with YouTube as soon as we can. Coming up on the channel, we have a Nethroi list that I am revisiting. I originally did Nethroi about a year ago, and there is a lot of new tools that have come out for that, so I'm going to be revamping that list. And then we will be taking further comment suggestions for commanders to look at in the coming weeks. Thanks so much for checking out the video, and I shall see you next time.